Good evening. Welcome to the Hudson Library. Let me just put down all my stuff here. Before we get started, just a reminder to silence your cell phones. Leigh has already told me we're going to have a lively Q&A, so make sure that you've got your questions ready. I'll go around with a microphone, or if you just want to shout them out, that's good too. She'll call on you. After the program ends, we'll have a reception, a book signing. That'll be out in the rotunda. So join us for that. You get a chance to talk to Leigh, maybe get some pictures, get your book signed. Books are available for purchase courtesy of the Learned Owl. I am honored to introduce tonight's speaker. Leigh McGowan is the host and creator of the viral, award-winning digital media brand PoliticsGirl. First launched on YouTube in 2015 and relaunched on TikTok in 2020, Leigh has become a trusted source of information in the age of polarized media, helping a diverse audience reconnect with politics and the American experiment. Known for her KitchenRants breaking down the key issues of the day into digestible pieces, Leigh has amassed hundreds of millions of views, won 2 Webbys, and launched the highly successful PoliticsGirl Podcast. Please join me in welcoming Leigh McGowan.
Sure, yeah. No, I'll use this one. I'll do some singing. Yeah. You guys, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it more than I can say, because if you know who I am, then you care about American democracy, and that's the point, right? Polly, thank you so much. Thanks to Hudson Historical Society for having me. What an amazing organization you guys have here. It's a fantastic. You're having such great speakers coming up. I saw that Timothy Snyder's coming in a couple of weeks. He was just on the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm telling you, you're in for a treat. The guy is brilliant. Anyway, if you don't know me, or if you got dragged here against your will, my name is Leigh McGowan. People call me PoliticsGirl online, but I do have a real name. And I am an immigrant. And I don't know if you know that. I'm obsessed with America, but I am Canadian. And I became a citizen in 2008, but I moved to the States right before 9/11. And I was living in New York City when 9/11 happened. And I really feel like that day is what sort of shifted my life. I knew exactly who I was. I knew I was in New York. I was there to study. But the way that city came together, and then the way the country came together after that event, really made me want to be an American. And that is kind of what shifted the course of my life. And then living in America, I became much more aware that the brochure that I had bought into as an immigrant wasn't exactly as it was made out to be. You know, this land of the free, home of the brave, place where anyone from anywhere could make it if they just worked hard enough. And I looked around and I thought, oh, we might have missed the boat on a couple of those things. And what could we do to make it better? So once I became a citizen, I started paying a lot of attention to American politics. And as a Canadian, I don't know if you guys know this, but we learn a lot of American history. You can't be the neighbor of the greatest country in the world without knowing a lot about the greatest country in the world. And so we learned a lot, but living here, I realized where we were kind of going wrong. And I started, as we were saying in 2015, just doing civics online. I started the PoliticsGirl project as a response to basically no one in my life caring about politics. I would try to talk to them about things, and I would just watch their eyes glaze over. And I'm sure you found that if you're a political person yourself, you're like, we need to talk about that. Let's not do it. And so I thought, why not talk more about it? Because I don't think that it's people that don't care. I just think that what have we been told not to talk about our whole life? Right? Politics and religion. And what are the 2 things that cause us the most problems in the history of the world? Politics and religion. And then we don't know how to talk about it. So I thought, okay, why don't I shift and start explaining why we do things? So I started with things like the Iowa caucus, why we do it there, you know, why the Supreme Court matters, these kind of things. And then as we were coming up on the 2020 election, I thought, I can't just keep doing this nonpartisan civics. I need to explain why I think it matters that we're going one way or the other, why I think it matters that we go this direction, why I think it matters. So I started doing it on TikTok to reach the younger audience and just take really complicated issues and synthesize them down, just make them digestible to people. Because a lot of the time, things just go over our head. It's like when you learn a new word, and then all of a sudden you're like, is everyone using that word now? And it's like, nope. When you don't understand, it just goes right over your head. And as soon as you know it, it starts to mean something to you. And that's what I wanted American politics to do. So I started doing these rants in my kitchen. I literally put my phone in my kitchen. People think I'm using some sort of a green screen to try and see more down home, but that really is my kitchen. It's just not fancy enough for LA, so people think it's not quite right. But yeah, no, I really do have a pull-up bar in the back. That really is my fridge. I live with boys. Anyway, so I started just explaining things, and you wouldn't believe the response. Because people really want to know more. They want to understand, but they don't have the time to get all into deep philosophical conversations about politics. They have their whole lives. So I thought I'll make it simple and easy. Then about 2 years in, I started doing the podcast because I personally wanted to know more about bigger subjects. So I would spend an entire hour on one subject with an expert, but talking the way we normally talk, talking the way common sense people would speak. We don't talk in acronyms. We don't do that stuff you see on TV with the, in the little box where we talk really, really fast at you and then you don't really learn anything. I wanted people to really understand far bigger topics. It's why I'm having guests like Timothy Snyder on, because he's a massive intellect. But if you just read his stuff, sometimes it can go right over your head. So I wanted to really talk about the way things are working here in this country, or in this case, not working. And then I wrote the book for the exact same reason. So the book itself is called A Return to Common Sense, because that's what I think we need to do, but also as a hearkening to Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Because when Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, we were a nation at a crossroads. We were this nation that was trying to decide if we should be independent or if we should stay part of the British Empire. And Thomas Paine came along and he said, I think there's one very distinct way we should be going, and here's my argument for why we should do that. And when I read it, I thought, geez, that's exactly where we are again now, right? We're this nation at a crossroads. And I think there is one clear path that we should be taking, which is to hold democracy's head above water, which is to use our common sense, which is to respect the other people. And then there's another way that we're being offered, and I don't think we should go that way, and let me explain why. So I did the very first part of the book, just called America 101, because a lot of us have forgotten what we learned in Schoolhouse Rock, or we didn't quite pay attention in history. And so I just did 20 pages at the beginning of the book to get us all on the same page. And what I said in the book is that if you remember everything about American government, if you know how our laws are made, if you understand the 3 branches of government and how they all intertwine, skip this section, it's not for you. But if you're like, oh, I could know a little bit more, maybe I should have a little refresher, these 20 pages will get us all on the starting point. And then I did the book around what I call 6 American principles, which are 6 principles, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, I think we can all agree make America America. So if you're sitting down to talk to someone and you say, like, let's just try and come to common ground, I think these are 6 things that we can really agree on as a principle, right? The first one being America is a land of freedom. I think it doesn't matter who you're talking to, Republican, Democrat, independent, non-voter. They would say, yes, America is a land of freedom. The 6th principle is government should be a force for good. And I think that we have forgotten that that is actually what it should be doing. That people like Reagan saying the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I don't think that did us any services, because here was the head of the government saying, the government can't help you. The government is bad. And I think that we as citizens should expect our government to help us. We should expect them to be there and do the right thing. We've just let so much go. We've allowed so much to take over. And I think we look around now and we go, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't how I expected it to be. And that's because a lot of us were so busy living in a democracy that we forgot we had to keep working on the democracy, right? I often compare American democracy to a couple in a long-term marriage, right? You've been in a long-term marriage, you're like, oh, he'll always be there. I don't really need to pay much attention to it. And I think that's what America kind of did with democracy. We just stopped paying attention. We stopped evolving. We stopped working on the relationship. And then we get us to a place where, like, in Ohio, boy, your democracy has been taken from you in so many different little parts, right? It's got to make you crazy. You can't even have your voices heard with your state that's gerrymandered, right? And then you get such a wonderful ballot initiative coming up this year with ballot 1, and there is one part of the government trying to trick you into voting the wrong way. That's not government being a force for good. That's not the way it should go. And I think that's what I wanted people to take out of the book. I wanted them to see in a very common sense way how we could adjust so we understand where we went wrong and how to fix it. Because I don't think there's any point in pointing out problems if you don't also give solutions. And solutions that you can talk to your friends and family about. Because I think everyone is quite exhausted at not talking about politics. Not just because, our grandmothers told us not to talk about it at the dining room table, but because it's become a hostile, scary endeavor. And I don't think it should be like that. And I think there's more people than you would imagine that actually want things to be better. And so I always say not talking about politics doesn't mean politics doesn't affect you. It means you can affect it. And I think at this point, in this moment in American history, we truly need to be taking responsibility, both for our democracy, but also for our friends and family, and saying like, hey, this has gone wrong, and here's how we can fix it. So if a little immigrant like me can tell you how great your country is, and it needs a little work, then that's what I'm trying to do. And I did it through my rants, I do it through the podcast, and now I do it through this book. So I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have about where we are sitting in American history right now, because the whole goal of my project in general is to make other people feel like they understand. It has never been about me looking smart. It's about other people feeling smart. I want you guys going into conversations, into dinners, into meetings, and feeling like, I know what that issue is. I know what's going on with that. Let me tell you what is real. Because I think we're so inundated with so much disinformation and misinformation that it's hard to open your mouth because you don't want to get it wrong. And I don't want people to feel like that anymore. I want them to really feel like they have control over this, and I want you to know that things could change for the better and quite quickly if we wanted them to. So if you have any questions, please ask, because I would love to talk more about this amazing country. Yes?
So how would you recommend speaking with somebody on the other side of the political spectrum? Like you said, you can be as informed as you want and be willing to talk to somebody else, but everybody seems to be dug in on one side or another. So if you say, if they believe you're this and they're this, you just seem to do a lot of this.
Okay, so the question was, how do you talk to someone who's on the other side of the political spectrum, right? Because people seem really dug in on their ideas. Here's what I would say. There are less people in that very small camp that refuse to hear anymore. Those people, I don't know how much you can do right now, because I think a lot of people need to see government working. When they've been told so much that government doesn't work, I think often they're gonna have to see the alternative. However, if you are going to have a conversation with them, I always say, start with curiosity. Why do you think that? Where did you hear that? How come that is what's in your head? And they'll say, well, I heard it from here, I did it from this. It's best to start there, because then you understand where they're coming from. The hardcore MAGA Trumpers at this point in history, right before this election, I don't think you're gonna have much chance changing their mind at this moment. I would spend more time talking to the people who think their vote doesn't matter, the people who think that voting itself doesn't matter, that their vote doesn't count. I did one of these events in California, and somebody asked, like, do I even need to vote because it's a blue state? Now, you guys in Ohio, boy, do you need to vote, right? Like, you need to be out there saying yes on one, and we want Sherrod Brown, or whoever, you know what I mean? Like, you need to vote. You know how much your vote counts. But I think right now the best thing you can do is talk to the non-voters, talk to the young people who are the ones that are gonna have to live with the future that we hand them. Talk to the people who think that it doesn't matter, that politics doesn't matter. And you can say to them, like, look, you think government doesn't matter, you're not into politics. A lot of people say that, I'm not that into politics. You're like, well, let me tell you, politics is into you, right? Like, from everything in your life, look around. If your stoplights work, if your street is cleaned, if it was snow, you know, like what your speed limit is, if you live through a pandemic, and right now, like, if you have the right to your own body, right? These all government. You go to school, public school, that's government. Lights come on at night, that's government. So you have to say to people like, listen, it does matter, so tell me, let me tell you that your vote matters. Let me tell you that you matter. Let me tell you why I am voting the way I'm voting, so you can have that kind of conversation. Again, these people that are dug in to voting for someone that's a felon or whatever right now, doesn't believe in women's rights, you might want to hold off, then wait for this election, because it's going to be, I think, quite definitive, but then it's going to be a mess, and then we're going to get to the 20th of January. And then you have to watch what I hope will be a competent government doing the things they said they would do, and then you can look at that person and say, look, no one's coming into your house to take your guns. Look, this has gotten done. Look, this has gotten done. I just wanted to point out Not in a way, but in a way that says, I want you to know that I want to work in government too. It's the reason I made the 6, because the 6 are things that everyone can agree on, and I wanted people to start from a place of agreement and then talk about where we went off track. So right now, I wouldn't spend too much time here because you might be banging your head against the wall, but I would spend your time on the people who think it doesn't matter and the young people who are not dialed in yet. Those are very important people to talk to at this moment in time. Yes?
So one of the giant problems, if not the biggest problem that I am seeing everywhere is, and no offense.
I was like, misinformation? Is it misinformation?
Yes, you use the words misinformation and disinformation instead of the real word, which is lie. Mm-hmm. And I have had it up to here with the weasel words, no offense to weasels, disinformation, and I mean, the problem is you were mentioning about how trying to talk to people about what government can and does do when you have the ex-president lying and saying that government isn't doing anything in the South right now, and people keep believing the lies, not disinformation or misinformation. It's outright lies. Mm-hmm. And the fact that nobody on the Republican side, except the governors once or twice, say, yes, we're getting help, but nobody on the right in Congress is saying, yes, he's lying. Everyone is lying to you on this side about this. And that's, again, no offense to you, but it's everyone in the media keeps saying dis and miss.
Yep.
Instead of lie.
Yeah, no, and listen, how irritating is that, right? I mean, beyond the beyond, right? I literally just did a rant from my kitchen saying, do we want to live in a post-truth world or not? Because we are on our way to that, where there is no truth, there is no lies. The truth is what you want it to be. Reality doesn't exist, and that's an impossible place to live. You can't build rockets without facts. You can't fix the economy if you don't believe in facts, right? We can't, if you were sick and you said, I would rather not know I have cancer because that's what I would rather not know. No, right? Like, you need to know the truth. There are truths and there are lies. And we must be able to live in a world like that. And you're saying, but I look at Congress. I look at a couple of Republicans right now being like, actually, they are helping a lot. You know what I mean? Like, it's infuriating because you feel like, do we live in the upside down, right? It makes you crazy. And I totally understand that. So there are a number of things that we can do. A, there are only 435 members of the House. There are only 100 members of the Senate. That is 535 people total that can make all of our federal laws, right? So first of all, we have to make sure that the people we put in those 535 seats are good, right? They're not Marjorie Taylor Greenes, right? They're not those type of people. People who will just blatantly lie to us or who are so insane that they think Jewish space lasers are going to kill us all, right? We can't have those people in one of the 535 seats. And I always say to people when they say, well, I only vote in the presidential election, I'm like, don't do that. Because here's the thing. Every 2 years, the Congress is up for election, right? Not the Senate, they're every 6 years. But Congress, every 2 years the House is up. We shouldn't have a single person in there who is useless or a liar or stupid, which is why we need new laws. We need new laws around mis and disinformation. We need laws around lying for profit. Is what we need. We used to have something called the Fairness Doctrine in the 80s, which we got rid of under Reagan. We need one for the new millennium. We need something that says, hey man, you can't lie to us for profit and not have any repercussions. We shouldn't have networks like Fox be able to lie to us, then get a lawsuit, then pay almost $800 million because they lied to us about the election and still propagate their lies every day. That should not be allowed because we can see what happens when our people have to live in two different realities, right? We do what you were saying, this, because of course we do. Because you should be able to trust what the president says. You should be able to trust what your news network says. But at this point where we are, we're going to need to make laws because things that seem normal, things that seem like common sense ideas, like the person that runs for president shouldn't be a felon, was never written down, right? Because we never expected someone who was a 35 times, waiting for he's out on bail, running for president. We never expected that. The founding fathers didn't expect that. They thought we'd be better than that. We're not. So we're gonna need laws. And we're gonna need laws around what I'm gonna call mis and disinformation, because yeah, we need laws around lying. And yet, we're gonna need to call it something fancier than that so people can get their heads around it. But in general, you should have to be sued if you're lying on the air. You should have your broadcast license yanked if you've been lying on the air. If you are a social media company that allows lies to propagate, you should be charged for every single one of those times it was spread. Because I'm telling you, the algorithm can stop it. They just don't. Because hate sells. They can do it, but they don't. So we're gonna have to make them. And that's the point of having those 535 people be smart enough and engaged enough and moral enough to start doing the right thing. And that comes down to what we can do, we the people, right? We can choose the right people. We can talk to our friends and family about why it's important that we choose the right people. Because at this point, we are gonna need more laws. We're gonna need more laws because every single norm we thought was expected has been thrown out. And we have to say, this is unacceptable because we see where our country went and this cannot continue. And I think that's so essential that people understand that because this is not sustainable. Yes?
Yes, along what this gentleman said here, I personally have been trying to approach both of my parents in that way. And I haven't spoken to them in 4 months because they didn't want, I'm sorry, they didn't want to engage.
I know.
So I was coming here hoping for a, pardon the pun, magic bullet. As a Canadian, did you discuss and find the same problems with the Canadian government before you came here? And was there a way for you to kind of approach family in a different way?
Yeah. Listen, I can't. The question was talking about not speaking with your parents about politics because you are on such different sides that you've just chosen to not engage. As far as my own family, if my parents were Americans, they would have been Republicans. My mother probably would have absolutely been a Democrat, but she voted the way my father voted. But I think the best example of parents would be my in-laws, who are very, very, very staunch Republicans, who are military. My father-in-law is career military, so that is how you vote. If you are military, you're a Republican, especially career military like that. They're very Christian, so they follow that route too, and everyone at their church is very Republican. And coming up on the 2016 election, we spoke a lot to my mother-in-law about the reasons we really thought she should vote for Hillary. And it took us a really long time, and she would say things like, I just don't like that Obamacare. And we would say, okay, what about Obamacare don't you like? And it goes back to being curious. And she would say, well, I don't like that they're forcing this or they're forcing that. And we said, what do you think about the Affordable Care Act? She was like, oh, I like that. And so we were like, okay, just so you know, those two are the same things. They just put Obama in front of it because people don't like Obama. But do you like this, and do you like this, and do you like this, and do you like the fact that I personally have a very serious lung disease? I would be uninsurable without the Affordable Care Act. I would die without the protections afforded to people with pre-existing conditions under the Affordable Care Act. And she was like, oh my God, like that meant something to her. So she changed her vote for that 2016 election. My father-in-law, straight Trump. 4 years later, we picked away at him, right? We were like, listen, what about this? What about this? Here's the thing that we were thinking. You know that thing you said about, and we would let him talk because he had so many ideas about a lot of things. And we would let him talk, and then we'd say, that's interesting because, and we would pick things that we knew were important to him. He's a kind, good man. He loves everybody. We would say, what about these people that are gay? You know that these policies would hurt them. What about this with the health care? What about your Social Security? You guys live off a military pension, Social Security. And they were like, what do you mean they're going to take it? We were like, here are some articles that you would not believe. Once we got in his head, he started hearing different things. And that's the thing about what I was saying about the words. When you learn a new word, once you hear in your head something from a trusted person, like your son, you start listening to things differently. And he started paying attention differently. Still gets all the emails from all the Republican things, still gets all the Trump stuff. And he started saying, I know this part isn't true, I know this part isn't true. I know this part is a lie. And then once the wool is off people's eyes, the wool does not go back on. He is the most adamantly vocal Democrat you've ever seen. It is such a trip for my husband. He's like, you wouldn't believe this. He's at his church. He's like, it took me such a long time because I didn't want people in my church to reject me for being different. And he said, no, I'm voting for healthcare. I'm voting for this. I'm voting for women's rights. Like, he has been so sure about why he's doing this as opposed to not wanting to be this. And I would say to talk to your family, because it's so heartbreaking how many people have lost family members or friends because of politics. And people say, I can't believe you're letting politics ruin your relationship. And I often say it's not politics, it's morality. And it's the things that I think are important in this world, like healthcare, like women's rights, like workers' rights, like unions, these kind of things. This is what matters to me, and this is why I find this party is closer to where I believe. And often people who think they are very staunchly one way will think, well, I also believe in those 4 things you just mentioned, and they start hearing things differently. There's nothing you can do if they're well down a Trump Fox rabbit hole. My aunt and uncle are like that. I mean, there's very little you can do, which goes back to what I was saying. It is very tough. But for those people, I feel like we need to lead by example. We need to have enough people who elect the right people in November, and then someone like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz need to be so brave in that first 100 days. We need to give them Congress. We need to allow them to make these changes that they're promising, things that will truly help people, like paying for home health care. I'm sure you're in that generation right now where you have kids and you have older parents, and you get squished. It's called a sandwich generation, right? She's talking about helping us pay for our elderly parents as we're still paying for our children. That is something we will see. We will actually physically see in our lifetimes. It's like seeing the roads being built around America that Biden did. It's like seeing factories go up in your neighborhood that they weren't there before. You start seeing government working. So it's harder to tell you that government doesn't work. You're like, well, but also, you know what I mean? So I think for the hardcore Trumpers who are well down a Fox rabbit hole, we need to just lead by example, show them government can work. And that right now is about, going back to what I said there, it's about getting the right people, the young people, the non-voters, those people out, so that we can show them a government that works and then say, this is why I believed in them. This is why I voted for them. You might not get them right away. It took us 8 years to get my father-in-law. But now, it's so exceptionally exciting. And it took a long time, and everything that's worth it does. And that's just the way it is. But I'm glad you're still trying. Yes, sir. Yes, in the blue jacket.
This time of year, there's always talk about, oh, we should abolish the Electoral College. What do you think presidential elections would look like if the Electoral College were abolished?
I mean, I think it would look great.
Well, would it look great for states that no candidate would ever go to?
Well, here's the thing.
It would look great for the East Coast and West Coast.
No, this is what people say. Listen, I totally understand that. And this has always been the argument. And there's a whole section on the Electoral College in the book for this very reason. Because the Electoral College is crazy bananas complicated. Like, it took me a really long time to truly understand why we do it like this. Like, really, truly researching this book, I was like, the Electoral College is making me crazy. What is this program? Like, it is deliberately complicated. And it was done specifically to make concessions back when we created the country, right? When there were only 13 states. Now we have 50 states. They are not equal in size, and they are not equal in power, and they are not equal in financial ramifications. So you have a state like California with 40 million people, and then you have a state like Wyoming with 700,000 people. They both have 2 senators, right? Which makes no sense because it gives Wyoming so much more power in the Senate than California, and yet the states are supposed to be equally represented there, but they're not, right? Because the voting average and the money coming from those states are not equal. So it's very peculiar. And you go, okay, well, we're not going to change that, except the Electoral College is also based on that. So California gets 2 electoral votes for their Senate, and Wyoming gets 2 electoral votes for their Senate. And then the rest of it is based on House size. So obviously California has more electoral votes. But at the end of the day, if you're someone who is sitting in California and you are Republican, also your vote doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't count. That's not fair, right? If you are someone blue in Wyoming, your vote doesn't count. That's not fair. How is that democracy? It's just not. At the end of the day, I think the concept of one person, one vote is the most fair. That way, if I am a Republican in very blue California, my vote for president matters.
But how would the campaigning be different? That's what I mean.
Okay, so let me ask you. You're saying if it was only based on population and I'm supposed to be the president and I want to get the most votes, I'm going to spend my time, the argument being I'm going to spend my time in California, in New York, in maybe Texas, right, to try and get the most votes, right? Right now, we already do that. It's just we spend time in Ohio, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. Like, there are 6 states that we spend all of our time in, and they have nothing to do with trying to get the most votes. They have to do with trying to win those swing states. That's it. If you're in California, no presidential candidate is coming to us, except for the fact that they'll come for some huge fundraiser and then, like, out of town, right? They're not coming to talk to the voters. Psh, we don't matter. And what you're saying is, and the argument has always been for the Electoral College, like, psh, we can't do that because then they'll only spend time in these big states. They're already only spending time in 6 states. They're not campaigning in 50 states. They're not going to North Dakota. They're not going to Massachusetts. They're not going to California. Those states are done. They're going to spend their time in only swing states. So we're already doing what the Electoral College was supposed to stop us from doing, but it's not one person, one vote. So if we want one person, one vote, if we want our votes to actually count, every single one of us in the whole country, then the Electoral College doesn't belong with us anymore. Now, it's a huge undertaking to fix it. It really is. It would take an amendment. We haven't had an amendment since the 70s. We don't even have the Equal Rights Amendment yet, right? However, the idea of getting rid of it, I think at this point is smart, because there's 330 million of us. And at the end of the day, the presidential election is won or lost by 40,000 votes in a handful of swing states. How's that democratic, right? So I think at this point we need to rethink the process, and that again goes back to the 535 people we have in those seats, because they're the only ones that can start that process. Yes, sir.
How would the process look to amend the Second Amendment, which would absolutely be necessary?
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it.
Yeah. I think it would be necessary to amend the Second Amendment if we started trying to prosecute people for the things they say. Now,
First Amendment, Second Amendment. Second Amendment with guns, First Amendment free speech.
No, I'm sorry. First Amendment, the right to free speech.
Sure.
And what chance do you think it would have getting past today's Supreme Court?
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? So we're talking about, can we prosecute people with the First Amendment the way it is? What would that look like if we wanted to try and do that? And then how would that play with our current Supreme Court? Is that correct, sir? Okay. I think that question is 2 parts. First, we want freedom of speech in America. I talk all about this in the book, and I start with that America's a land of freedom. We talk all about free speech, because I think that is the one that most people hang their hat on when they think about America, right? I am American, I have freedom of speech. That's a huge one, right? You can't just, as what just happened in Russia, criticize the president, be rounded up, thrown in jail, and that dissident that just happened, he just died in a Russian jail for criticizing Putin, okay? Our First Amendment was created for that reason, so that we could criticize our government, protest our government, be whatever religion we wanted to be. That's all First Amendment. No one can tell us who to love. No one can tell us I mean, they can, but they can't tell us. We can say what we want to say. We can criticize our government. We can write an op-ed in a paper and say, I think my government is, and no one's going to come and get us. That's part of what America was supposed to be, right? So that in itself is something we want to hold dear and hold on to very, very carefully. The idea of lying, that lying is covered under the First Amendment, I think is where we've gone off track. This idea that Elon took over Twitter for the First Amendment so that Nazis could do Nazi stuff, as well as they possibly could. I think that there is a difference in hate speech, just like the Supreme Court years ago ruled that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? There is a difference between slander and free speech. There is a difference between lying on paper about a company and free speech. Free speech does not mean no accountability for your speech. And I think that's what a lot of people have forgotten. They think that free speech just means I can say whatever I want to say, whenever I want to say it, and no one can stop me. It's like, that's true. And yet, if you do that at your office, you might get fired. And yet, if you do that, at a rally and people don't like what you say, you might get, beaten up. There are ramifications to the things that we say, and I think people have forgotten that. And they lump it all together as free speech. I do think our country needs far more accountability for the things that we say. And it shouldn't just be from private companies. It should be from the government, but again, that goes back to me saying they shouldn't be able to lie to us for profit. There should be ramifications. We should have a new fairness doctrine. Now, your question also went to how would that play with the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court is broken. Straight up, you can't fudge around that. It is broken. When people talk about the Democrats wanting to stack the court's already stacked. The court has been stacked for years. This is a 40-year plan from an organization called the Federalist Society, run by Leonard Leo, who had a long-term goal because he could see that the conservative, Christian-minded way of America was dissipating. That over time, the voting bloc was not going to be with them anymore. And we can see that from our popular vote in elections, that more of the country wants this kind of more liberal-minded, more open-minded way of being, and there is a minority of very conservative people who don't want that. And they knew they weren't going to get it through legislation, and they knew they weren't going to get it through elections. So they went after the courts, and they have been incredibly successful. And we need to say, hey, they did this beautifully. They saw what happened in 1973 with Roe, and they made a plan to overturn it, and they were willing to wait 40 years, but they got what they wanted, right? And now, boy, did they want more, right? So we need to understand that that court was created specifically for this reason, and they're not going to stop at Roe. They're going to chip away at everything we take for granted, everything we think is common knowledge in America. They're going to take little pieces of it until we look exactly like they want us to look. So there is a lot we can do about the Supreme Court. There is so much we can do, which I lay out in the book. I actually go through every idea that anyone's ever had. Can we stack the court? Can we put ethics rules in? Can we do this? Can we do that? I went through each one, and I give the examples of how to fix it, because a lot of it can be fixed almost immediately by Congress, because Congress is the check on the Supreme Court. We just forgot about it, and they stopped doing that job. But honestly, you could put in ethics rules right away. We could put in term limits right away. Not getting them off the federal bench, because the Constitution says they are put on the federal bench for life. But it doesn't say they are put on the Supreme Court for life. So if you want to say 18 years on the Supreme Court, and then you can either go back down to an appellate court on the federal bench, or you can retire. But you don't get to just stay there indefinitely. Then we won't have them hiring 30-year-olds, because they'll be there for 70 more years. It is an 18-year plan. That's the biggest plan that's on the table right now. And if you want to leave after, you can go back to the federal court. You are on the federal court for life. But it also says within good standing. The Constitution says that. I think someone taking bribes, you could argue, is not in good standing. I think someone who is listening to court cases of someone who pays them money is not in good standing. So I think we could make that argument too. But again, that's the job of Congress. So it is incredibly intrinsic on us to hire the right people that are willing to do that. Far more Sheldon White Houses, you know what I mean? People that really understand what's going on and are willing to change it, because there is so much we can do. Quite frankly, I have always believed that the court needs to be way bigger. Not just because The 9 that we're so used to seeing is how it was set when we only had 9 appellate court districts and now we have 13. They were made to match and now they don't. So we could easily go to 13 justices. But I think we'd be better off with something like 27. And I make that argument in the book, that we could have 2 courts of 13 or 3 courts of 9 that rotated each justice. They picked their court cases at random. They picked who they were going to work with at random. So you could no longer say, oh, I'm going to stand before this justice and I know exactly what answer he's going to give me. You don't know who you're going before. You don't know when you're going before them. 3 cases, 3 courts of 9 or 2 courts of 13 with an alternate would mean they could take vacations, they could get sick, they wouldn't have to die on the bench because one justice in 27 wouldn't make that much of a difference. It would make a huge difference to justice being blind again. And I think that will help us the most, to really expand the court, to make it so we don't just know what the answer is going to be before they even have the case. That makes no sense. And the Supreme Court is the only court in the entire land that has 0 ethics rules. That makes no sense either. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to turn to Congress and say, we the people ask you to make these changes, and if enough of us ask for it, we will get it. Yes?
I was curious, when I look around, we're kind of a certain generation here for the most part. Do you talk on college campuses, and what do you hear there? What are their questions?
Yeah, no, I haven't actually talked on a lot of college campuses. I think it is something that I will definitely do more moving forward. Right now, I reach them on socials, which is where they are. But I do think that I also work with a lot of people whose entire job is college campuses. I just did a big fundraiser for a group called Rise, and their whole thing is Gen Z college campuses, particularly right now, Gen Z college campuses in swing states, which goes back to our original question about we're really only focusing on certain states, right? But these kids are so much more engaged than they used to be. Particularly the young women are so engaged because they're watching their rights be stripped away. And I think they also have mothers of a certain age that are saying, listen, this is something I didn't have to fight for, or this is something I did fight for, and I don't want you to have to go through it again. This shouldn't be happening. I do think those are important conversations to be having with your younger daughters to make sure that they and their friends are getting out. But I have a son, and I talk to him constantly about it. And I think that's what we have to do if we have, young children, and I mean young voting age children, 18 to 25, say. Talk to them about the things that are being taken from them, the things that they are taken for granted. Because young people could change every single election at this point, which is why one party is trying so hard to take polling places off their college campuses, to make driving people from college campuses to polling places illegal, to have very complicated voter ID so you can't vote. If you are working so hard to stop people from voting, you're not trying to win. You're trying to make sure the other side can't win. And I think we need to explain that to our young people very clearly, because I often talk about voters abroad, who are about 6 to 9 million people a year, who could easily vote and change every election in America and just think their vote doesn't matter. Could change every election. Young people could change every election. And I think the more they realize how much power they have, then we start talking about these 535 people and how they can do everything to change things. And we start making sure that they vote every 2 years, because that's Congress right there, every 2 years. And if you don't like the president, it's Congress that holds the president accountable. If you don't like the Supreme Court, it's Congress that holds the Supreme Court accountable. So I think we really need to teach them, the young people particularly, how important it is to make sure that their voice is heard. And we have to tell everyone right now how important it is to vote in this next election, because they're trying to make sure our voices are never heard again. If we think we're getting a regular election, if we get a president that we had before back, we are kidding ourselves, because we're not.
Actually, I'm going to follow up. My son is home from college, so we went to vote today. And I think the interesting thing was this is his second election, but first with the president.
Right.
The things he didn't know, like he could take his phone in, he didn't. He goes, I get overwhelmed by everything on the ballot. I don't know what all those jobs are.
Yeah.
One, where to go find a sample ballot and how to do that. And then I'm not allowed to take my phone in there or paper in there to show me all that. And I mean, I'm talk to my kids all the time too, but to not even have that basic knowledge or fear that they could get in trouble for doing that is still prevalent at this age kind of was overwhelming to me. And then to tell them why it's important to vote down ballot. We did that big vote 2 years ago. Oh, but by the way, the Senate can take that away from you again. You need to stay on top of this. So even though I thought my job was done, I'm still blown away by how much there wasn't known. So that was an interesting following up the college about, or question about college. My other, how do you stay hopeful?
Yeah, I think it's so funny. First of all, yay that you're talking to your young people about that. Talk to the young people in your life about this stuff, because I know that most of us were not spoken to about it when we were young people. No one was like, listen, you need to sit down and here's how the ballot works. I will say there are wonderful organizations like Blue Voter Guide, the Vote Save America guys, which your kids will probably know. They have a whole sample ballot thing where both organizations, you put in your zip code, they give you exactly what the ballot looks like, then you can check and see who's endorsed those people. So even if you're not just voting straight blue down the ticket, which I would recommend right now because the Republicans have lost their minds, then I would say they tell you which organizations are supporting them. So if you're very environmental, you could just put in the environmental organizations and they'll tell you which candidate they're endorsing. That really helps people a lot, because a lot of us are like, this Supreme Court justice, like this person, this city councilor, I don't know. So it's very helpful to be able to put in your zip code. Both organizations do it great, and then it shows you who's endorsing them, which is very helpful, because most of us don't know. Even if we're not young, we don't know who the school counselor is or whatever. Just don't vote for Moms for Liberty, As far as how I stay hopeful, I always think it's so funny when people call me hopeful. My husband was like, you are hopeful. I was like, what? I don't think of myself as being like an optimist. I've always seen myself as a realist. Never been a pessimist. Always seen myself as a realist. I know how things work. I figure them out, and then I see what could happen. And I think when you do that with this country, it's impossible not to feel hopeful, because there really is so much we could do that most of us have no idea how quickly and simply it could be done if we hired the right people for the jobs, if we hired the right people in state legislatures, if we hired the right people for local government, if we hired the right people at the federal level. Because honestly, government could be a force for good. Our lives, you look at some of these other countries in the world that have it together, I swear to God, the internet has made us both stupider and smarter. What's happened is you can see now how people live in other countries. We've been told our whole life we're the greatest country on earth. And then all of a sudden we can see people in Germany or Denmark, and we're like, wait a second, they're leaving their babies outside while they have a coffee with their friends inside. Like, what? How did that happen? Wait, they build these huge playgrounds that are outside the free schools, and then they go to college for free, and they get all the textbooks for free, and the students are paid to, you're like, hold on, what? We built this entire community for older people so they don't have to be alone. Other countries are doing this. They have high-speed rail. They have cleaner cities. They put walkable cities. There are so many things that could happen if we looked at other countries instead of saying, we're better than you, and we said, what can we learn from you? What can we learn from you from your health care? What could we learn from you for the way you do paid leave? What could we learn from you because there's lots of other ways of doing it, and we're not nailing it. We should stop saying we're the greatest country on earth and really start trying to be it. And that means being curious. That means asking how people are doing it. Saying, like, how did you do healthcare? Because we're clearly blowing it. People are going bankrupt just because they had the bad luck of getting cancer. We can't do that anymore, right? So when you look at what is possible, and there's so much that's possible, and I put so much of it in the book on purpose, so that you would end the book and be like, oh, we can do, let's go. That's what I want people to feel like, because really, the more people that understand how the system works, the more people that'll be there to fix it, because it can be fixed, right? I often compare what I do to, if you told me that problem with my car was the carburetor, I'd be like, great. What's the carburetor? I can't fix that because I don't even know what part of the car that is. I think that's how most people feel about government. They just think I don't know how it works. It's too deliberately complicated, and I don't want to sound stupid, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I don't want to make the wrong choice on this ballot, so I won't do it. And I want people to know that the more we know, the easier all of this is to fix. So start with knowledge, share that knowledge with your friends, and then let's get to fixing it, because honestly, we could have what other nations have, and we really could be the country we tell the world we are. Yes, sir.
I hate to cut this off because this is so fascinating and so good, but I want to give time for the meet and greet. So
Oh,
we'll
sure.
do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Who did you?
Thank you. I wonder if you could make sense of some data that's been put out, I think, by one of the reputable people. 20 years ago, the people who identified as independent were 30% of us. Today, it's 49%, which means only 25% identify as Republican and only 25% identify as Democrat. How do you make
You want
sense?
to make sense of that?
Make sense of that, yeah.
Okay, here's how I would make sense of that. Did you guys hear the question? Yeah? Okay, so here's how I'd make sense of that. Our country works on a two-party system. It doesn't matter how many times we tell you that the third-party candidate could win the presidency, they could not. That is not how the system is set up to function. And the third-party candidate at the presidential level only ever acts as a spoiler. On the local level, absolutely, a third party can win. Even at the congressional level, a third party can win. But once we get up to the presidential level, we are a two-party system. Right now, the red party, the Republican Party, the traditional conservative party, has been absorbed by what I'm going to call MAGA. They are not the traditional Republican Party of even Reaganism. It's a completely different animal. And I think a lot of people who are traditionally conservative have a hard time necessarily saying they are Republican now, because they feel like, well, I kind of feel like they left me behind. They went off in this weird direction where they hate women and, you know, they want to round up immigrants and throw them in camps, and that does not feel like me. So they will no longer say they associate with that party. Then the Democrats have been demonized for years. Hate them, hate the Democrats. Democrats are evil, Democrats are baby killers, Democrats are this. So there are people who believe in liberal values who also don't want to be painted with that brush. So they won't equate themselves with Democrats. I often say, I don't think I'm a Democrat. I vote with the Democrats because they're the closest to my value system. I am a liberal person who believes in human rights, who believes in immigration. I'm an immigrant. I believe in love who you want to love, be who you want to be, read what you want to read. I believe there are experts out there. I don't think I should be telling teachers how to teach. I'm not a teacher. I certainly wouldn't be telling my pilot how to fly a plane. You know, like, there are experts out there, and I believe them. I believe in climate change, those kind of things. So I am a liberal. But of those two parties, this is the one I most associate with. But if you ask me if I was a Democrat, I would say, I mean, I guess. But if you're asking me if I'm an independent, I think a lot of people feel like, well, I kind of sit here. You know, I have these ideas and I have these ideas. So I think that as the two parties have become more and more dichotomous, there's more people who say, I don't want to be associated here, and I'm definitely not this anymore, so I'm going to sit here. So I think the independence has grown because people are tired of being painted with either brush. Right now, I'm very, very proud to be a Democrat. I think what they're doing right now is incredibly strong and brave. I love the ticket. I think what Joe Biden did was noble and gifted and kind. I think he's going to be looked back on as one of the best presidents we ever had. But I think that we have painted that party with such a terrible brush, or this party has painted them, that there's people that just don't want to be lumped in. So they say they're independent. I think what we have to do is stop painting ourselves with the two brushes and say, what are my values? What do I believe in? Which goes back to your original question over here. How do I talk to my parents? How do I talk to my people? I think we start with our values and we say, this is who I am. These are the things I believe in. These are the things I'll stand up for. And then I look at the two parties, because that's what I'm getting to choose from, and I say, which one is best to give me what I want? Because there's an old expression that says democracy isn't like an Uber, you know what I mean? Like, you don't just get to go exactly where you want to go. It's a bus. You get on the bus and you get closest to where you want to go. And that's what we have to choose right now. Which one of these two parties, even if you're in that independent 49%, which one of these two parties will get me closer to where I believe the nation needs to go? And I think that is an easy way to talk to people, because you say, this is the party that seems to me to be closest to my values and will take the country in the direction I believe we should be going. I think that's the easiest way to probably explain it. So thank you guys so much. Please. I do hope you'll buy the book, but more importantly, I hope you'll share it. Because the more people who know about this, the better off we'll be. And the more of us that understand we can fix this country, the faster we'll do it. So thank you guys so much for being here today. I'm going to sign some books, but if you want to watch anything I'm doing, the PoliticsGirl Podcast is always available. And of course, I will be in my kitchen from here until Kingdom Come, probably. Thank you guys.